but welcome back from lunch, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is um, our fourth training, I believe, at this point of the day, for our full day of in-service trainings. I'm very excited to have Patty here with us to present on a very important topic, elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. This is an hour-long presentation, so please stay muted throughout the entirety of the presentation. If you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, or wait until the end of the presentation. And just a reminder, you can use this same Zoom link to join any of the other two presentations that are happening after this today. You can either leave and come back on, or you can just stay on the same Zoom link. We'll have it open. There will be another 30-minute break after this training before the next one. And make sure that your communities are tracking your attendance for your training today. And yeah, I am very pleased to welcome Patty. So Patty is a licensed social worker and the Director of Protective Services, Crisis Intervention and Money Management at Tri-Valley. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Worcester State and has been working at Tri-Valley for over 34 years. Tri-Valley is a nonprofit that helps seniors and people with disabilities live independently with dignity in their own homes or settings of their choice. Prior to starting at Tri-Valley, she worked for the Department of Youth Services and Department of Social Service children in foster care, DYS children in group homes, with dual diagnosed adults in group home settings, and again is currently the Director of Protective Services, Crisis Intervention and Money Management at Tri-Valley. So welcome, Patty. Thank you so much for presenting on this important topic today. And with that, I will pass off the virtual microphone to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy doing these kind of presentations. We try to get them all out in the community so people are aware of this. As they said, I've been with Tri-Valley for over 34 years now. When I started here, they would get 2 reports a month. And as of last month, I actually hit 161 reports coming in for 1 month. So the need is out there, and it's really important that we let people know about this so that they can make the appropriate reports. I'll be going over what we do for protective services, although some of this is geared a little bit towards Tri-Valley in particular. All the ASAPs, Aging Service Access Points that have protective service units are under the same rules and regulations of the state. So what I say is the definition of physical abuse is the same regardless of where you are in Massachusetts. So it does apply across the state no matter where you are. So basically, Tri-Valley, together we serve. We're concerned, compassionate, committed to serving the elderly in our community. For adult protective services, we service 60 and older. Things I'll be going over today is what the mission of protective services is, why there's a need for it, who provides protective services in the Tri-Valley area, what the criteria for services is, what is elder abuse, how you report it, and what the protective service unit does once a report has been filed. I'll also go through what the process is from beginning to end and some of the common frustrations, and certainly any questions either during, as they said, you can put them in the chat or feel free to ask me at the end. So the mission of protective services is to protect elders from neglect, abuse, ensure the safety of elders, and investigate complaints in a professional and respectful manner. We work cooperatively with family members, community agencies, and healthcare providers. So why is there a need? Based on the National Council on Aging, it is estimated that 1 in 10 Americans age 16 over will experience some form of abuse during their lifetime. And as the numbers keep growing of people over age 60, that is just going to keep going up and up. As I said, when I started, they would get 2 reports a month and considered themselves busy. Now I can hit 160, 170 in any given month. The financial loss to elders is estimated to be in the billions of dollars each year. That is not a typo, that is billions with a B. And that includes things of financial exploitation as well as all the scams that are going around. That is really hitting the elderly population really hard. Tri-Valley alone has seen a 78% increase in the number of PS reports and 150% increase in the active cases just over the last 3 years. And every year I'm seeing increases. So your help is essential. We want to make sure that everyone who's seeing something is reporting it so that we can help these elders in the community. So why don't people report? Many elders don't report because they lack capacity. They don't have the ability to be able to pick up the phone, make a report. They're ashamed. These are family members, close friends, friends that they know, and they don't want to admit that it's happening to them. They're afraid. Oftentimes, the abuse that's going on is including threats that if you tell anyone, I will kill you. And they are concerned that that could truly happen. They feel guilty. As anyone who's been abused, oftentimes they feel that if they had just done something differently, it wouldn't be happening. So it's all their fault, not the abusers. They wish to protect the abuser whom they love. Like I said, oftentimes these people are their sons, their daughters, their spouses. They love these people. How could they admit that something's going on? We hear many times, well, I can't do anything against my son because if I do and kick him out, he'll be homeless. So they rather put up with the abuse than hurt the person that they love. And like all victims, they believe it's their fault. It's never the abusers. Mandated reporters. We often don't get reports in from them. Why not? Sometimes they lack knowledge. They don't know what to look for or what to do if they do see it. And that's why these type of trainings are so important so that people are aware of what is out there and how to report it once they do. Lack of time, they're too busy to notice or to ask. I'm sure like myself, everyone out there, you're trying to do the job of like 3 people and you're running around from the moment you get to work till even after your time to leave. But we need to take the time and make sure that we make the report. And a lack of understanding. Some people just don't believe it could happen. And we run into this a lot. We had a case once, and I will throughout my presentation explain different cases. They're all true cases that we've dealt with. One of my workers read the newspaper and she was reading an article about a couple whose son had a psychotic break. The police were called in. They ended up having to call the SWAT team in. The SWAT team, there was gunfire, bullet holes in the walls, glass broken. The son got sectioned out of the home. The husband ended up having a cardiac issue through all of it. He ended up in the hospital. And then the wife was left home alone. Now, through that whole incident, there were so many mandated reporters. There were police, there were SWAT people, there were ambulance, EMTs. When they went to the hospital, there were doctors, there were nurses. All these people were involved, and we didn't get a single report on the matter. We found out about it from my worker reading about it. We called them up and said, you guys really need to make a report to us so we can get involved. We finally got a report. By the time we got out there, this poor woman was sitting in her house with bullet holes in her walls, glass on the floor, and a boa constrictor in the corner in a cage, but still not knowing what to do. And she was just left there. So we were able to get in, do our investigation, but also provide the supports that she needed to make sure the snake got to her vet so she didn't have to deal with it, help get the home cleaned up so that she wasn't having to deal with that, and be able to address the ongoing issues of getting her husband back home and support for the issues with her son. So it's really important. Don't always rely on the fact that you think someone else would have reported because there was another mandated reporter there. Make your own report. Make sure that we get it. It is very, very important. As I said, I'll be going through Tri-Valley stuff. Tri-Valley, we are located in Dudley. And we're one of several ASAPs that have protective. Currently, right now, there's myself as director. I have 2 supervisors who oversee the program, 9 protective service workers, 2 crisis intervention workers, an anchor crisis worker, 1 full-time and 1 part-time money management coordinator, and I also oversee the statewide money management coordinator. So my department has grown incredibly through the years. So what's the criteria for protective services? They must be over the age of 60 to be eligible for protective services. We do have people that we are their birthday present. When they turn 60, they get a report to us. If they are under 60 and we get a report, we will try to find out where the person can go to get them help. So if we get someone who's disabled and 59, we will refer them over to the Disabled Persons Protection Commission or DDS, depending on their disabilities, but we will try to get some sort of help. They have to be living in Massachusetts. If they're living somewhere else, again, we will research and find out where someone can be reported. Our territory is very close to the border of Connecticut, Rhode Island, so we often get calls for those, and we will look them up and get them to the right place. And you also have to be believing that the elder is being neglected, abused, or exploited. You don't have to have the proof. That is up to us to investigate and make that determination. You just have to have a good faith belief that that's what's happening. So what's abuse? We cover all these types of abuse: physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, neglect by a caregiver and self-neglect, and financial exploitation. So physical abuse. It is the intentional infliction of serious physical injury, a threat to inflict serious physical injury where the agency believes there is intent and ability to carry out the threat. And it also includes impulsive acts. We once had a case where the elder was arguing with her daughter in the car. They got out of the car and the elder was still arguing with the daughter. The daughter finally put up her hands and she's like, "Mom, you got to stop." When she did, and she put her hands on the elder fell and broke her hip. Now, certainly she didn't mean to harm her. It was an impulsive act, but we would look at that as physical abuse. How we handle those type of cases can be very different from someone who's just intentionally hauling off and punching someone. But we want to make sure we get the help so it doesn't happen. In that case, we were able to eventually, we had a finding, we were able to provide supports. The elder went to Adult Day Health and it got a break from each other. So then when they were together, they were not arguing as much, and it was a nice, happy ending. Some examples. This is the only slide that makes noise. I don't know if you're hearing it too, but it's in there. So it includes hitting, pushing, throwing objects, choking, kicking, threatening with a weapon, and even forced medications. People don't think of that as a type of physical abuse, but people can't take medications, even if it's in the best interest of the elder. They need that medication in order to survive. They cannot force them in the mouth. Reason being is if you try forcing meds into someone's mouth, they can actually choke and die. So that is looked at as physical abuse. And if we're looking at something like that, what we try to do is work with the doctors to see, is there medication that can be crushed and put in the food? Is there an injectable type of the medication? Is there a different type of medication, maybe has a smaller pill that it's easier for the person to swallow? So there's ways to work around that. So a sample case, excuse me, I just gotta grab the tissue. Sorry about that. We had an 80-year-old woman in a car with her daughter. This was the one I was telling you actually about. She was arguing with the daughter. After they got home, the elder was still arguing. Daughter put up her hands and the elder fell and broke her hip. Even though it was impulsive, she didn't mean to do it. It is a form of physical abuse. Emotional abuse. This is the intentional act or omission resulting in significant harm to the emotional state, decisional capacity, or functional capacity of the elder, or creates reasonable risk of significant harm to the emotional state, decisional capacity, or functional capacity of the elder. So some examples include yelling, intimidation, insults, humiliation, and threats. An example of this would be a 90-year-old man living with his daughter. Elder's incontinent. The daughter yells at the elder that if his incontinence continues, he will have to go into a nursing home. The elder's frightened by this and upset that he may have to go into the nursing home. For him, that would be extremely emotionally abusive because he believes that that could happen. As professionals, we know you can't just send someone to a nursing home, but for an elder, that does make a difference. They don't want to go there. It is very scary for them when they're starting to hear that. We get a lot of calls oftentimes of couples who are yelling and screaming at each other. When I gave you the definition, I'm just going to go back to it for a second. It has to be that significant harm to the emotional state. When we have couples yelling at each other, they may have been yelling at each other since the time they were married. And now they're over 60 and everyone's like, oh, it's emotionally abusive. What we're really looking for is what is the significant harm to them. If they argue and one of them goes for a walk or another can go for a ride and they're fine, that would not be looked at as emotional abuse. But now maybe because they're older and they used to be able to go off and handle it and come back and be fine, now they can't because they can't drive. They can't go for a walk because they're medical issues. And now they're stuck with each other in the same little small home and they can't eat, they can't sleep, their blood pressure is going up. That's when it crosses that line into emotional abuse. Sexual abuse. As you can imagine, this is one of the most underreported types of abuse for elders. It includes any unwanted sexual acts, so anyone who's saying no, any unwanted sexual behavior after an elder who has capacity says stop, or any sexual advance to an elder who lacks the physical or mental capacity to refuse, except for spousal activity where there's no harm. So if we have a couple who have continued engaging in sexual activity, even if one starts to lack capacity, as long as they're not saying no and there's no harm coming to them, we would not look at that as sexual abuse. But if harm is coming to them or they say stop and it continues, then that is looked at as sexual abuse. Some examples include rape, sexual assault, touching of genital areas. So this can include like if someone has a personal care attendant and they are washing them and they're scrubbing really hard in the genital areas and there's breakdown, that would be considered sexual abuse. Or even forced viewing of pornography. If they have an adult child in a home who's leaving around all sorts of pornographic material, if that's upsetting to the elder, we would look at that as sexual abuse. An example, an 82-year-old female who has personal care attendant helping with her bathing. The PCA is scrubbing the genital area very hard. At a doctor's appointment, the elder states her genital area is sore. When the doctor examines it, they find the skin is red and there's starting to be wounds. So there doesn't have to be a penetration or anything like that. It can just be from the scrubbing that's causing the injury. We would look at that. Neglect. This is the one area there has to be a caregiver. The caregiver must be over the age of 18, legally competent. It can be a family, fiduciary, or contracted voluntary relationship. There has to be a failure or a refusal to provide for some of the necessities essential for physical well-being. And there also has to result in a clear, immediate danger to the elder's health, welfare, or personal safety. And an elder who has capacity must not be refusing help. So you could have an elder who has capacity and the caregiver is trying their best, but the elder is the one refusing, not the caregiver. So it's the caregiver's failure or refusal that we're looking at. Some examples. Open source from incontinence. So if they're wearing Depends, they're not getting changed enough. Emaciation, if they're not being fed. Injury from lack of supervision. We get a lot of those caregivers. It's an extremely tough job. It's 24/7. There's no breaks. And oftentimes when they have to go to the bathroom or they have to take a shower or they fall asleep, that's when we will see something happen to the elder. Hypothermia due to lack of heat. Right now, we're headed into the winter season, so it gets really tough for us. A lot of people are choosing, do I feed the person? Do I provide the heat or do I get the meds? So we see that. And deterioration in medical conditions due to inadequate medications. Some of the medications that people are on, they just cannot afford them. And then we try to go in and try to work with the doctors to help that. So an example would be a 77-year-old man who has dementia receiving care from his son. And the elder was found wandering out in the street with pajamas and slippers on, but no coat, and the weather was 32 degrees. So we see this quite often. These are cases that are always looked at as emergency cases when we get them in. We have actually had cases where people have wandered, fallen into snowbanks, gotten frostbite, and required amputations. So these are cases that we need to know right away. We want to make sure that we don't have any further wandering episodes. We want to make sure these people are safe. It's a little less scary in the summertime, but then we run into other issues like ponds. People have lived by wooded areas, live near ponds, and they can fall into the water and they can die from it. So make sure if you do hear about someone wandering, you are letting us know immediately. Financial is the substantial monetary or property loss to an elder or gain to the alleged abuser. It's an intentional act or omission by the alleged abuser without the informed consent of an elder who has capacity. With protective services, we don't have any financial guidelines. We've had some that make $500 a month and you take a little bit of money, $10 from them, it makes a difference if they eat or get meds. We have other clients who have made as much as $1 million or more. And if you took a little bit of money from them, they probably wouldn't notice, but it could be substantial to the abuser. So we can look at it at either end. We don't have to have a set amount for us to look into it. Some examples include the durable power of attorney being signed by an incapacitated elder. Massachusetts has a law that you can sign a power of attorney if you have capacity. And even if someone is very confused, if they haven't been adjudicated by a court as incompetent, they can still sign if they know in the moment what they're signing. So this leads to a lot of people taking advantage of this and getting power of attorney over elders. It includes obtaining money through stealing or trickery, using elders' resources for their own personal gain, mishandling the finances in any way, and forgery. We do have some outright, they just sign the elder's name and take their money. An example of this is an 85-year-old woman who has been to the same bank for 35 years. The bank suddenly notices large checks written to the daughter and many ATM withdrawals, and the elder's account has been overdrawn on several occasions. So these are all clear signs that something's going on with the finances and that we need to take a look at it. Self-neglect. The other really big area that we have is self-neglect. It is a failure, refusal, inability, or resistance of an elder to provide for one or more of the necessities for physical and emotional well-being. This can include many different things. It can include loss of housing, people who are getting evicted, the deteriorating housing, the people who are hoarding. I've gone into the worst of the worst houses, cockroaches, spiders, other animals, rats, mice. We look at all that. Inadequate nutrition, so they're not eating enough, they're losing weight. Financial problems, they are confused to the point that they can't pay their own bills. Unmet medical needs, so they're not making sure they get their medications, going to doctor's appointments, follow-up care. Personal care issues, they're not able to bathe themselves, and personal safety issues. So you might have a wanderer who has no caregiver, but they are starting to wander. We would look at that as self-neglect. We cover evictions and housing issues, the financial issues, so they can't pay for their medical care or medications, can't pay for food, rent or utilities, credit card debt, and scams. Scams are huge. I once worked with a gentleman who basically he would send away, he knew he was being scammed. He kept lists of all the money he sent. He lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. He would continue to do it no matter how much we discussed it, no matter how much he knew. And to the point that one time I actually went to visit him and I'm like, well, how's it going? And he's like, well, I went up to Canada and met with I was going to meet with the people. And I'm like, well, that's very concerning. You're lucky that you made it back. And he told me, well, that's okay. I brought my 38 with me. And I was like, well, it's lucky you made it across the border without being arrested, carrying a gun. But he didn't see the issue and he kept doing it till eventually he lost his whole house. And we could never get a doctor to say he lacked capacity. He knew what he was doing, but he just kept hoping for that big win. So it was a shame. He lost a lot of basically all his savings in his home. We deal with addictions, alcohol, drugs. That includes both street drugs and prescription drugs. We are seeing more and more street drugs now that we didn't see before. Before we would see like the prescription one, Xanax was always a big one. But now we will actually see a lot of problems with like Oxy. I actually went to one client too who was at a nursing home. His friend brought him in some drugs. He overdosed at the nursing home. They had to Narcan him, bring him to the hospital. I met with him. I get there and I'm like, so what brought you to the hospital? And he was like, oh, my leg. And I'm like, are you sure it wasn't because of the Narcan that you needed because you overdosed? Oh, no, it was my leg. Needless to say, he never worked with us, would not recognize that he had a drug problem. Gambling, we have quite a few people who are addicted to the gambling, whether it's actually going to the casinos or even the scratch tickets. A lot of people will do that. We had one elder who would walk over 2 miles to get to places that she could gamble. And hoarding, as I said before, is huge. We see a lot of that. People risk losing their homes, being evicted because of it. So we see a lot of that. The dementia, confusion, wandering, and depression. A lot of the elders have depression and we want to make sure they get treatment for it because they don't have to necessarily suffer with that. So an example would be an 83-year-old woman living alone in elder housing with no informal supports. She's refused services multiple times. Her second egress from her apartment is blocked, creating a fire hazard. The pathways are narrow. You can get by them, but they are very narrow. And there are strong odors of rotting food, urine, and she failed her housing inspection, which means that she's going to be at risk of eviction. And those are pretty typical cases that we see. So mandated reporters, who are they? There's 2 types of mandated reporters. There are mandated reporters not subject to fine, and they include people like the executive director of a home care program, homemakers, case managers, and health aides if they are not licensed. If they're licensed, then they would go into the subject to fine. Subject to fine include doctors, nurses, police, fire, Director of Council on Aging, and Council on Aging outreach workers. These are just a few of the categories. It is not all inclusive. So there's many professions, but whether you're subject to fine or not subject to fine, it's just, you need to report. You need to make sure that we get people the help. The fine can be up to $1,000 for failing to report. Like I said, I've worked here over 34 years. I've yet to see anyone actually fined, but make the report. You know, it could make the difference of saving the person's life. So reports are confidential. Your identity will not be revealed except to the district attorney when we're required to report to them. In extreme cases of neglect, abuse, and exploitation, we must report to the district attorney. They have a right to know who made the report to us. Other than that, we will not tell people. I let people know, and when I speak to referral sources, I let them know too, is our elders often are very quick and they will try to find out who it is. We always answer with, I can't confirm or deny who the report source is, but it was obviously someone worried who wanted to make sure you got some help if you needed it. We've actually gone to court and the district attorney, the judge has actually asked for who made our report. And I've actually had to tell judge, I can't report to you who made it. So they get a little bit upset, but that is how we make sure that we keep that confidentiality. We have had elders who have told report sources that, well, Tri-Valley came in and they told me it was you. And then the reporter responds with, they told me they weren't going to tell you. Well, we didn't. They just got you to reveal it yourself. So it's always up to you whether you let them know or not. When I was a case manager, made protective service reports, I would always let the person know I was making a report. I would let them know I'm mandated, I'm making the report. If you refuse, that's on you. But I have to do it. But not everyone feels comfortable. If anyone threatens to sue you because you filed a report, the law protects you. As long as you made the report in good faith, the law will protect you from the actual suit. They can file it, but they won't win. And again, if you're subject to fine, it could be a $1,000 fine. So what do you report? Anytime you suspect neglect, abuse, exploitation, or of a person 60 years of age or older. How do you report? It is available all the time. Oops. So we now have a centralized intake unit. Prior to this development, you had to know which agency to call to make a report directly to them. So it's much easier now. You can call this one number. They will take the report from you and they will get it to the correct agency that covers where the elder lives. You can also file a web. You go to mass.gov and you type in elder abuse report. It will take you to the report. I give this warning to everyone who files a web report. It will time you out, so please make sure you take the time and complete it all at once. Don't get distracted by other phone calls, things coming in. Both the intake unit and the web are available 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when in doubt, call and make that report. The online reporting is for non-emergency situations. If you have an emergency situation, please call the CIU, the Centralized Intake Unit, directly, because they'll be able to make sure they get in touch with us quicker if it's after hours. You can go to mass.gov, type in the search bar, like I was saying, elder abuse report, click on the box to make a report, complete the form. Give enough time because it will time you out. So what happens once you make a report? Once it's done, the intake is completed by the centralized intake unit, or we get the submission from the online report. It's important to let us know what your concerns are, who the alleged abuser is, others involved in the elder's care, always emphasizing elder and worker safety. We don't want to rush in and make a situation worse for an elder. So if you know that you're calling because the elder's being physically abused by the son, but the elder goes to the senior center every Tuesday and Thursday. Let us know that in the report, because then we will work on setting up to meet with them when they're at the senior center, so that we get a private meeting with them without having to worry about the son finding out right away. He may eventually, but we deal with that, but we want to make it as safe as we can for both the elder and our worker. Screening time, we look at how quickly do we need to respond. Emergencies are handled within 5 hours. So if it's a situation, it isn't necessarily us handling it, but we have to respond in some way. So we usually get the reports at 4:30 on a Friday, and it's an emergency. But oftentimes these are something that we might just have the police go out and do a wellness check to make sure they'll be set for the weekend. Other times it's a phone call that we'll do. But we will handle whatever's necessary within that first 5 hours. Rapid reports handled within 72 hours, and within the first 24 hours, we make a determination if they need to be seen right away or if they can wait. But we will look at what needs to be done. And then all others are seen within 5 calendar days. So that's our weekends, holidays, our workers' time off, it's all included. So our response time is very quick. What happens once it's screened in is the worker is assigned. They meet with the elder, preferably alone. The elder can choose to have someone else there if they want, but we try to meet with them always alone, just so that we can get their opinion without any influence of anyone else. We assess their capacity. We are not doctors, but we are trained in assessing the capacity. To give us a rough idea of what we feel, are they able to understand their situation or not? We're always assessing safety and intimidation. So if they're refusing something, but it's because they've been threatened, if you tell someone, that makes a difference to us. We explain the assessment process with them. It is now that they cannot refuse our assessment, but they can refuse to participate. So if we go there and they're like, I'm not talking to you, we let them know, that's fine, that's your choice, but we will be looking into your situation anyways. And we'll let you know what we find. Then we work and gather as much information as we can. And based on all that information, we pull it all together and we either substantiate or fail to substantiate based upon reasonable cause. And then once we do that, we share it back with an elder. We are not a court of law. We do not need 100% proof that something's going on. We just need 51% belief that something's happening versus not happening. So because we're social service, not a law enforcement, our level of opening is much lower. So a competent elder can refuse to participate, as I said, but we will still complete the assessment. If the elder does refuse to participate, the worker comes back, they consult with the supervisor, and we decide who should be contacted. All contacts undergo a balance test by the staff. This test helps the staff determine who will be contacted and how much information can be shared. We are not just going to go talk to all the neighbors or, anyone that just might have had some contact. We look at, is the person we're going to contact actually aware of the situation and would have information? If we believe they do, then we'd ask, well, is speaking to that person going to place the elder at increased risk? If we know that the allegation is that the son is beating up the elder, and one of the people we're looking at maybe is the son's girlfriend, should we be speaking to her? Well, if we speak to her, she may tell the son, and then he may, in turn, physically abuse the elder more. So we may choose, no, it's not safe to be able to speak to her. But we may be able to decide, well, speaking to the doctor, he's aware of this situation. And if we speak to them, they're professional, it will not place the elder at risk, so we could go forward. And then we also look at, is there information they may have necessary for the investigation? We're not just going to speak to anyone, but is it necessary to make a determination? Particularly like going to doctors and other professionals are really important to get information for us. So once we gather all the information, we have a finding, we work on a service plan with the elder, ways that we think we can solve the issue, make it better for them. We go back to the elder and we obtain consent for services, for making referrals and coordinating care. They have the choice. We may open for physical and emotional abuse, and we may determine, okay, we want to help them get a restraining order. We want to set them up for counseling. Maybe the daughter who was abusing them also did housework, so maybe we want to refer them for home care services. Then we present it to the elder. They can pick and choose if they have capacity. They may say, you know what, I'm willing to maybe have a homemaker come out, maybe some counseling, but I'm not getting a restraining order. I'm not kicking my daughter out onto the street. Then we can come back with, how about maybe a no abuse order so she can stay in the home, but she can't abuse you. And if she does, she could be arrested. Maybe they'll go for that, but not required to take our services. They can decide. If the elder refuses our services, the case will remain open for a short time for the worker to build rapport. Oftentimes they'll say no. We're like, well, okay, well, how about we come back out in a month? We'll look at it again. And maybe something happened. And now when we go back out, they're like, you know what? I really do need your help. Or they may choose to say no still and would have to close. We complete monthly visits to ensure the elder's safety. And when the abuse or neglect is alleviated or competent elder chooses to refuse us, we close the case. We always let them know that should the situation change, get worse again, they're always more than able to call in a new report. We will look at things more than once if necessary. So what happens if the elder lacks capacity? We assess the risk to the elder. The elder must be evaluated to determine to lack capacity, and if the elder is in need of a guardian conservator. If the risk to the elder is too low, we may not choose to do anything. So if we opened it up because it was hoarding, but not too bad, there were clear enough pathways, there is a second egress, we may choose not to go forward. But if we opened up because they were self-neglecting and they're an insulin-dependent diabetic and they're not taking their insulin, then we determined the risk to them is very high. Without the insulin, they could die. So we need to get them evaluated, determine if they need a guardian or conservator. Guardian in Massachusetts is of the person and conservator is of the finances. That is not the same for every state, but that's how it runs in Massachusetts. We explore, if we're going that route, if there's any appropriate family member or friend to be appointed. Oftentimes, because they're in protective service, there is no appropriate family member. That's why they're in protective services. But if there is, then we would help support them becoming the guardian or conservator. If there's no one, then we request a state slot. There are limited state slots, so we have to make sure that we are saving these for the most needy of people. If it's approved, we go to court. The judge would grant it, hopefully, usually because we try everything else first. By the time we get into court, the judge usually always grants our requests. And once a guardian conservator is appointed, we work with them to provide the services. People often think that protective can just go in, remove a confused person, put them in a nursing home, and then they'll be safe and everything will be fine. That's really not the case. We can't remove them. A guardian can, and they have to get special permission from the court. So it's a long process. It does take time. So how do we work together with people? Anytime you suspect abuse or neglect, please make sure you give us a call, make a report, let us know what you think the elder's capacity is, any family dynamics that are going on, the living situation, who's in the home, what their relationship is to the elder, any risk, safety to the elder or to the worker, and access to the elder alone. Because we're going in for protective services, not everyone's happy to see us. And we have to make sure that when we're sending in our workers that we get them back out safely. I once went to a home where the daughter kept going in. So we were sitting talking with the elder in her home. And the worker said, well, do you keep your door locked to make sure your daughter just doesn't come barging in? And she says, oh no, and she leans down and she pulls out a butcher knife that was about this long. And the worker's like, okay, can we put that away? I was already checking to make sure I could get out a window or back way. She wasn't threatening us, but it could have turned out really bad. You never know. I've had workers who have been sitting talking with elders. We think they're home alone, and all of a sudden someone pops up behind them and they didn't know they were in the home. So if you know people are in the home, if you know they have a violent background, please let us know, because we want to make sure it's safe. And if necessary, we will actually go to a visit with a police escort. We've had to do those on numerous occasions because of the safety risks to the elder and to ourselves. What can you do during an investigation? Please just carry on your case as usual. Let us know of any new information if the elder consents, and maintain confidentiality of the investigation. Just because a report was made or just because we started an investigation doesn't mean we've continued to be involved. Many times we'll get reports and someone will say, well, I know you're involved with this client, and we're not. We can't tell anyone that, but please don't give them any information about the protective. If they have questions, refer them directly to us, and we can handle it. And you can let them know if someone has a concern, tell them to call in the report, even if you know we're involved. So what does the worker do? They investigate all the allegations that are in the report. When appropriate, they'll alert people to risks going into the home when it's appropriate. If we know there's guns or violent people in the home, if we're able to share that information to other professionals to make sure it's safe for them as well, we do that. We gather information from elder, family, and other collaterals. If the case is open, we develop the service plan with the elder and we try to work with them on whatever areas they're willing to work on. Again, they can refuse. We'll keep it open and hope they change their mind, but if they don't, we have to close. Things you can expect from us: we deal with safety and legal issues. We help with restraining orders, no abuse orders. We file with the district attorney in extreme cases. We work with the courts, durable power of attorneys, competency. We always let people know we are not lawyers. We are not counselors. We are not law enforcement, but we will help get people hooked up with the right places or assist them. So if someone's like going in for a restraining order, it can be very scary for an elder going into court, especially if they have a little bit of confusion, or maybe their hearing isn't as good and all these people around and they don't know what to do. We can go with them and provide them the support. We can't testify on their behalf because we're not there when things happen, but we can provide the emotional support during the process with them. And we can help if they get the order to make sure it gets to all the right people, and constantly reviewing with them what to do if the restraining order is broken. We work on relationship issues, communication skills, setting boundaries, family meetings, trying to get people to communicate better. We set up for counseling referrals. Like I said, we are not counselors, but we can set up referrals. We refer to our home care department oftentimes, like if we have a hoarder and they need cleaning, we can refer over to our home care department. Visiting nurses, if you have someone who's not caring for themselves, taking their meds appropriately, we might be able to get them in to monitor the meds. And we work on setting up any other services. We help with applications if they need, applying for Mass Health, CHAMP applications if they need other housing, things like that. What can you do after the case is closed? After abuse is alleviated, resolved, or the elder refuses, your role can be critical. Just because we close out because something's done doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. Something happens again, make a new report. Always maintain your relationship and services with the elder as you're able to. We once had a case where a gentleman, he was referred, he had a grandson living with him who would go out, drink, come home drunk, and go after and beat up the elder. The first time we had a report, the elder absolutely refused, would not let us work with him. So a while later, we get another report. This time he worked with us, but he'd only meet with us outside the home. By the third time, he finds a separate phone line for his bedroom and a door with a lock for his bedroom. Eventually, what happened was the grandson went out, got drunk, came home, started to go after him. The elder was able to get in his room, lock the door, and call the police. By the time the police got there, the grandson had actually cracked the door trying to get in at the elder, and he probably would have seriously hurt him had he been able to get at him. Because the police finally got involved, and with all those steps, he was removed. He did not return to the elder's home, and he was able to live out the remainder of his time at the home, safe and free from being physically abused. So it's important, even if you think, well, they went out before, nothing happened, I'm not going to bother. Please make a report every time you know that something's going on. So some frustrations we run into, we get frustrated just like other people get frustrated with us, but this is what happens. Families who provide marginal care to the elder, but it's not enough to substantiate neglect. An elder might get their depends changed maybe only twice a day. While we agree that it probably should happen more, if there's no skin breakdown, there's no redness, the doctor isn't concerned, we may not have to be able to have a finding. Competent elders who refuse to participate in the investigation or refuse the PS services. An elder, we had one lady who would keep getting hit by her son, she'd have black eye. She kept refusing. We couldn't do anything. She had capacity. She had the right to make that choice to stay there. And those elders who choose to stay in a bad situation and make poor decisions. As long as they understand the situation, they understand the consequences, they have that ability, they have the right to make the poor decisions, just like you and I do every single day. And all self-neglecting elders can be very frustrating. So, any questions? I've been chatting a long time. I'm trying to keep the line.
Thanks, Patty. Folks can feel free to drop any questions into the chat or even unmute yourself to ask questions if you'd like.
I am adding my email into the chat. Please feel free to take it if you ever have a question, a concern. I always let people know, you might come across a case and you're like, oh, should I report? Should I not report? I don't know what to do. Feel free. There's always someone in my department. I have no problem with people giving me a call. Let me know. I'll be glad to discuss every situation. And it may be, no, there's another program that might handle it, or yes, you need to make a report right now. So please feel free.
And Patty, if there is someone who is repeatedly refusing help or assistance, is there any limit to the number of times you can report seeing
Nope.
abuse or neglect happen?
Nope, we will always look at it. Sometimes, like if we had a case, we opened it and we closed out because refusing, and the very next day someone reports the exact same thing, we probably wouldn't look at it again. But if it's something different, then we would look at it. Or if it's been a month or two, maybe something changed, we would look at it again. And we have some people who it seems like every 6 months they're in. We get them and we will keep looking at it every single time to see if it's appropriate for us to investigate.
Right.
Did you say you were going to put your phone number as well? This is Janice.
Yep, I can put that as well.
Okay. And we had a situation, one thing that you mentioned, but the ED, we called the ombudsman instead. We talked about both. Was that an okay decision, you think?
Absolutely. They have an assisted living ombudsman, and that's usually when it is a staff person who is the abuser. We do not
okay.
get
That's not what happened. But, okay.
If it's resident to resident or the family member coming in, that's when we would be involved. But if it comes to us and we think it's ombudsman, we report to them. Same with them. If they're involved and they think, oh no, it's more protective than us, they will report to us.
Okay.
So we always have an open communication to make sure that someone isn't being missed. And we have cases sometimes that we're like, wait, should it be them? Should it not be us? I'll screen them in just to get them started and make sure that someone isn't being missed. And then if we need to switch it up later, we will. But I don't want someone in a bad situation because we're deciding jurisdiction.
Right.
I would just get in there.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I hope it was informative. That people, understand more about it now. We'll make reports. Like I said, not everyone makes them when they should. So, and even if your coworker made one, make one yourself, because when that happens, if one person has some information, the other person has another, and look at the first report and say, oh, there's not enough. Or maybe look at the second one, oh, it's not enough, but together it's like, wow, yeah, there's something going on. I need to look at it. So always make your own report. All the information is important to help us make the best decisions to help these elders.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patty, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it.
I guess last call for any last questions in the chat or audio. Going
Quiet
once, no? All right, I think that's it. But thank you so much again, Patty. I really appreciate it. I think everyone learned a lot. I definitely did. I was paying attention. And yeah, so thank you again. And for everyone else, we will be back here in a half an hour for de-escalating aggressive behavior with Patricia Raskin. So again, we are staying on the same Zoom link. So feel free to either jump off and back on, or just kind of hang out on this Zoom link. And we will be back here at 2 o'clock. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Patty, so much.
Thank you. Glad to do it. Bye.